I was 18 the year it happened, first semester, a state school in the Midwest, the kind of campus where the dorms are named after donors nobody remembers anymore. My roommate was assigned through the housing portal, not chosen. You fill out a form about whether you're messy or clean, whether you sleep late, and the system matches you with a stranger. Mine was a guy named Derek. Quiet, kept to himself, always had his side of the room spotless in a way that honestly made me feel bad about mine. The only weird thing, and I mean the only thing, was that Derek asked me not to leave the closet door open. Not locked, not anything dramatic. He just said, first week, kind of offhand, "Hey, can you keep the closet shut when you're not in it?" I figured it was a smell thing, or he didn't like his clothes visible. Whatever. College is full of little roommate quirks. I didn't think about it again. For the first month, everything was normal. We got along fine, went to the dining hall together sometimes, didn't talk much past the basics, but it was easy. No tension. I actually remember thinking I'd lucked out with the roommate lottery. Then in October, I woke up around 2 a.m, and the closet door was open. Not a big deal, except I remembered closing it before bed, out of habit at that point. I got up and shut it and went back to sleep. 2 nights later it happened again, except this time Derek's bed was empty and the bathroom light wasn't on, so he wasn't just up using it. I lay there for probably a full minute deciding whether to say anything, and then I heard him come back in from the hallway, completely normal, said he'd gone to fill his water bottle. Fine, except the water bottle was still on his desk, full, when I looked the next morning. After that I started noticing the smell. Faint, almost metallic, like a match that had just been struck and blown out. There for a second when you walked past the closet, then gone before you could really place it. I asked Derek if he smelled it too, and he just said no in a tone that ended the conversation. The 4th time the closet door was open, I actually looked inside. Nothing unusual. His hoodies, a duffel bag, some shoes lined up neat against the back wall. But the back wall of the closet, which should have been drywall like the rest of the room, felt cold to the touch in a way the rest of the room didn't. I remember pressing my palm flat against it, and it was like touching the inside of a refrigerator. I told myself it was just an exterior wall, bad insulation, whatever landlords and dorm buildings deal with. I checked the room next door's layout in my head. No, that wall backed onto the interior hallway, not the outside. There was no reason for it to be that cold. I didn't bring it up with Derek again. He wasn't unfriendly about it, just closed off in a way that made me not want to push. But I started noticing he'd check the closet door before we left for class, every single time, like a tick. Shut it, check it, shut it again. The last week before winter break, I woke up at some hour I didn't check, and the closet door was open again, and Derek was standing in front of it, not doing anything, just standing there facing it, completely still in the dark, for long enough that I lay frozen and watched him for what felt like a full minute before I made myself go back to sleep rather than say anything. He didn't come back to that room after break. Housing said he'd requested a transfer. No details given. I never got a straight answer out of anyone about why, and I never asked him directly, because by then I honestly didn't want to know. I still don't know what was behind that wall, or if there was anything at all. I just know I checked every single night after that the closet door was shut before I turned off the light. I worked the overnight shift at my university's main library my junior year, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 3 nights a week. It paid well for a campus job, and honestly, I liked the quiet. Most nights it was just me, a handful of students pulling all-nighters on the 4th floor, and the building settling around me. The library was an older building, 70s construction, with a service elevator in the back that technically wasn't supposed to be used after hours, maintenance only, but the panel for it sat right behind the front desk where I worked, and every so often the call button would light up on its own. Facilities told me it was just old wiring, a known quirk of the building, nothing to worry about. I believed them. It happened maybe once a shift, sometimes not at all. For the first couple months, that was it. The light would flicker on, I'd ignore it, it'd go off again in a minute or two. Routine. Then one night in late October, the button lit up and stayed lit, not flickering, just solid, for almost 20 minutes straight. I remember watching the little numbers above the door cycle, floor by floor. Like the elevator itself was moving, even though nobody had a key card for after-hours access, except me and the 2 facilities guys, and I could see both their names logged in at the front gate as not on shift that night. I called facilities after-hours line. No answer. I sat there for what felt like a full minute just watching the numbers climb, and then they stopped on 4. The floor with the old periodicals, stacks, the one nobody used anymore because everything had gone digital. The doors never opened. The button just went dark, all at once, like someone had let go of it. I didn't go check. I want to be honest about that. I stayed at the desk the rest of the shift and didn't move. In the morning I told the day shift girl about it, and she got quiet and said the elevator thing like it was something she already knew about and wouldn't elaborate past that. After that night, I started noticing other things. The motion sensor lights on the 3rd floor, which were supposed to shut off automatically after 15 minutes of no movement, would sometimes come back on in a section I could see clearly had nobody in it. I checked the security footage once during a slow shift, scrubbing back through hours of empty stacks. No one walked into frame before the lights came on. They just came on. I told myself it was a sensor malfunction. I actually went and looked up how per-motion sensors work. Convinced myself it could be a false trigger from temperature change, an HVAC vent kicking on nearby, something like that. It made sense in the daylight. It made less sense at 2 in the morning, alone at the desk, watching the little dot on the floor plan light up in a section with the vents nowhere near it. The last week of that semester, the elevator light came on again, same as before. Climbed to 4, stopped. This time I heard something too, very faint, from somewhere above the ceiling tiles near the desk, not from the elevator shaft at all. A sound like dragging, slow, unhurried, moving in the direction of the stacks. I quit that job in December, told my supervisor it was a scheduling conflict with classes, which wasn't true. I never went back to find out what was on the 4th floor after hours, and I still don't know what the day shift girl meant by the elevator thing, because I never worked another shift with her to ask. Junior year, 3 of us rented a house off campus, an older place, probably built in the 50s, that the landlord had chopped up into a rental years before we got there. Cheap, close to campus, exactly what you'd expect from off-campus student housing, a little rundown, but ours. The house had a small room off the kitchen the landlord called a mudroom. More of a closet-sized space with a single window, and none of us used it for much besides storing bikes and an extra fridge for beer. It had come with a deadbolt on the inside, which the landlord said was original to the house and just hadn't been removed. Odd detail, but old houses have odd details. We moved in August, and the first month was uneventful. Typical house stuff. One roommate always left dishes in the sink. The water pressure upstairs was bad. Normal things you complain about in a group chat. In September, I started noticing the smell again. I don't know a better way to describe it than a match just struck, gone almost as soon as you noticed it, mostly near the mudroom door. I mentioned it to my roommates, and one of them said she'd smelled it too, by the stairs, and figured it was old wiring, which the landlord half confirmed when we texted him, saying the house had some quirks from a fire a long time back that had been repaired. That should have been the whole explanation. Old fire damage, faint smell, nothing more. Then, in October, the deadbolt on the mudroom door started being locked in the mornings, when none of us remembered locking it. Small thing, easy to dismiss the first time. Maybe someone locked it and forgot. Second time, one of my roommates swore she hadn't touched it. Third time, I was the last one up 2 nights running, and I checked it myself before bed both nights, unlocked both times, locked both mornings. We went through the obvious explanations together, actually sat down about it, half joking, half not. Nobody in the house was sleepwalking that any of us knew. The lock wasn't the kind that could seize or self-engage. It was a manual slide bolt. Nothing electronic. Nothing that could malfunction into a locked position on its own. None of us had given a key to anyone else. The landlord said he hadn't been by. By November, the bikes in the mudroom had started ending up knocked over, wheels facing the door, every single morning, no matter how we left them the night before. My roommate started keeping a hair tie around one bike's handlebar as a marker, just to see if it moved. It did every time, always rotated to face the same direction. The last thing that happened, right before we left for Thanksgiving, was the coldest, literally. One of my roommates went to grab a beer from the mudroom fridge around midnight and came back upstairs pale, said the room was so cold her breath was showing, even though it was 60-something degrees everywhere else in the house. I went down to check for myself. She was right. I stood in the doorway of that room, watched my own breath fog in front of me, and did not go any further inside. We never told the landlord the real reason we didn't renew for senior year. He probably assumed it was normal turnover. I still don't know what was in that fire, or what actually happened in that room before us, and none of us have ever gone back to ask. I did debate in college, and my sophomore year I drove out to a weekend tournament a few hours from campus, solo, because nobody else on the team could make the trip that particular weekend. It was late February, already dark by 5, and the drive back Sunday night was mostly empty 2-lane highway through farm country, the kind of drive where you don't see another car for 15 minutes at a stretch. About an hour in, I picked up a hitchhiker sign, not a person, just an old handwritten sign nailed to a fence post that said North Ard 2MI, pointing down a gravel turnoff I didn't need to take. I only registered it because it seemed like a strange thing to nail up out there. No houses visible in any direction. I didn't think about it past that. Rural roads have weird signage. I kept driving. For a while after that, everything was completely normal. just headlights, radio static I kept retuning, the hum of the road. I remember specifically thinking how unbothered I felt, how easy the drive was going. Then, my gas light came on earlier than it should have. I'd filled up before the tournament ended, knew roughly what my tank could do, and the math didn't line up. I still had almost 80 miles of range unaccounted for. I pulled over at the next gas station to top off just in case, and while I was there, I noticed the same hand-painted sign style, North Ard, on a different post, at a completely different intersection, 20-some miles from the first one. I got back on the road and told myself it was probably just a common local road name, nothing more. Rural counties reuse road names all the time. That explained the sign. It didn't explain the gas, but I chalked that up to a bad gauge. About 20 minutes later, my phone, which had been navigating fine the whole drive, lost signal completely. Not just no bars, but the map itself froze, showing my little blue dot stuck in the same spot on the road for what felt like a full 5 minutes while the odometer kept climbing. I pulled over to restart it. When it came back, my location was correct. Current, no gap in the route I'd actually driven. Just the display had frozen. I sat there for a minute in the dark on the shoulder, engine running, telling myself, bad signal area. Common enough out here, dead zone, that's all. Phones do that. I'd had dropped signal before. What I couldn't explain away was what happened when I pulled back onto the road. In my headlights, maybe 200 yards ahead, someone was standing at the edge of the gravel shoulder, facing away from me, not moving, no car anywhere near them, no house lights in any direction. I slowed instinctively. By the time I got close enough that my headlights should have lit them up clearly, there was nothing there. No one on the shoulder, no one in the ditch. I didn't stop to check. I drove the rest of the way back at probably 10 miles over the limit, both hands on the wheel, radio off, and didn't relax until I saw my dorm's parking lot lights. I never told anyone on the debate team the real reason I asked, after that, for us to always travel to tournaments in pairs. I still don't know what was standing on that shoulder, or why the gaslight came on early, or what North Ard was actually 2 miles from. I've never taken that route back at night again. I was in Ra my junior and senior year in one of the oldest residence halls on campus, a building from the 1920s that the school had already announced would be torn down and rebuilt after my graduating class moved out. Being in Ra meant doing rounds, walking the halls a few nights a week, checking that doors were locked, quiet hours were being respected, nothing was on fire. Standard stuff. The building had a basement level that had been sealed off years before I got there. Not condemned exactly, just not part of student housing anymore, used for old maintenance equipment and storage. Araz had a master key that technically opened it, though we were told never to go down there, just that it was off limits for safety reasons related to the upcoming demolition. For most of junior year, rounds were exactly what you'd expect. Boring, honestly. I got good at recognizing which doors had music leaking out at 2 a.m. and which ones actually needed a knock. The first odd thing was small, the stairwell door to the basement, which was supposed to be permanently locked, kept being found slightly ajar during my Thursday night rounds specifically. Never any other night, always Thursday, always just cracked an inch or two, never fully open. I mentioned it to facilities. They said the door was original hardware from the 20s and probably just didn't seat right in the frame anymore. Old building, they said. Old doors don't always latch. I believed that for a few weeks. Then, one Thursday, I actually pushed the door shut myself, checked that the latch caught, heard it click, and came back an hour later on the same round to find it open again, same inch or two, same as always. Around that time, I started hearing something during rounds that I initially wrote off as pipes, a low, rhythmic sound, almost like tapping, coming from somewhere below the first floor hallway, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. I asked a few of the students on my floor if they'd noticed it too, expecting them to have no idea what I meant. 2 of them said yes, immediately, without me prompting them, said they'd assumed it was radiator noise, old building settling. I actually went and researched the building's heating system after that, because I wanted a real answer. The radiators in that hall had been replaced 8 years earlier with a different system entirely, one that didn't produce that kind of rhythmic sound. I confirmed this with facilities directly, so it wasn't the pipes. I didn't have another explanation, and for the first time, that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Then came the hallway lights, specifically the fixture right outside the basement stairwell door. It would flicker exactly 3 times, evenly spaced, then hold steady every single Thursday night round, like clockwork. I timed it once, out of nervous curiosity. 3 flickers, about 2 seconds apart, then nothing, every week, never 4 times, never 2. The centerpiece of it, the thing I still think about, happened my last semester as an RA. I was doing my normal Thursday round, saw the basement door cracked its usual inch, and this time, before I could stop myself, I looked through the gap. The basement stairwell light was on, which it was never supposed to be. No power was even routed down there anymore, according to facilities. At the bottom of the stairs, in that light, I could see a shape, not a person exactly, just an outline, still, facing away from the stairs, positioned like it was looking at something on the far wall I couldn't see from where I stood. I didn't go down. I pulled the door shut, heard it latch, and did not open it again that night or any night after. I finished my rounds like normal and didn't tell my hall director what I'd actually seen. I told her the door kept malfunctioning and asked facilities to replace the hardware, which they eventually did. The building came down the summer after I graduated. I've looked at photos from the demolition a few times online, out of some impulse I can't fully explain, hoping something in them would explain what I saw at the bottom of those stairs. Nothing in any of the photos does. I still don't know what was down there, or why it was always Thursdays, and there's no one left to ask, because the building isn't there to ask it of anymore. My parents came up for Parents' Weekend my sophomore year, and since campus hotels were booked solid months out, they ended up staying at a cheaper motel about 15 minutes off campus, an older single-story place with the rooms all facing an outdoor walkway, the kind of place that's been there since before the interstate rerouted around town. I stayed with them for 2 nights instead of my dorm, sharing the second bed with my younger sister who'd come along for the trip. The only strange thing my dad mentioned, checking in, was that the front desk clerk told him not to bother requesting room service after 11, because the East Wing doesn't really get serviced at night. An oddly specific thing to say, we thought, for a motel that clearly didn't offer real room service to begin with. We laughed about it and didn't think more of it. The first night was completely uneventful. We went to dinner, walked around campus, came back and crashed early, all of us wiped from the day. The second night, around midnight, my sister woke me up whispering that she could hear someone in the room next door pacing, slow, steady steps, back and forth, for what felt like a long time. I listened too. She was right. There was definitely someone pacing on the other side of the wall. Motels are thin-walled, not unusual. I told her to go back to sleep. What made it stick with me was that in the morning, walking out to the car, I glanced at the door to that room out of curiosity. And there was a maintenance notice taped to it, the kind hotels put up when a room's out of service, dated almost 2 weeks earlier. I mentioned it to my dad, mostly as a funny observation, and he actually went and asked the front desk about it, half out of curiosity himself. The clerk, a different one from check-in, told him that room had been closed since a plumbing issue 2 weeks back, and nobody had been in to fix it yet, so it should have been completely empty. We ran through the logical explanations in the car, actually talked it out as a family, half to reassure my sister. Sound carries strangely in old buildings. Maybe it wasn't that room at all. Maybe it was coming from further down, and we'd misjudged the direction in the dark. Maybe a maintenance guy had gone in overnight, and we just hadn't seen a truck. My dad even called the motel line later that day to ask directly if anyone had accessed the room overnight for repairs. They checked their log. Nobody had. The last thing that happened was small, but it's the part I remember most clearly. Checking out the final morning, walking past that same door one more time, I noticed the maintenance notice had been moved. Not removed, just shifted, hanging slightly crooked, like someone had opened the door from the inside and let it swing back against the paper. We never stayed at that motel again on later visits, without ever really discussing why. We just always booked somewhere else. My sister still won't talk about that trip if it comes up. I don't know who or what was pacing in a room that had supposedly been empty for 2 weeks, and I've never gone back to that stretch of road to find out. My parents came up for Parents' Weekend my sophomore year, and since campus hotels were booked solid months out, they ended up staying at a cheaper motel about 15 minutes off campus, an older single-story place with the rooms all facing an outdoor walkway, the kind of place that's been there since before the interstate rerouted around town. I stayed with them for 2 nights instead of my dorm, sharing the second bed with my younger sister who'd come along for the trip. The only strange thing my dad mentioned, checking in, was that the front desk clerk told him not to bother requesting room service after 11, because the East Wing doesn't really get serviced at night. An oddly specific thing to say, we thought, for a motel that clearly didn't offer real room service to begin with. We laughed about it and didn't think more of it. The first night was completely uneventful. We went to dinner, walked around campus, came back and crashed early, all of us wiped from the day. The second night, around midnight, my sister woke me up whispering that she could hear someone in the room next door pacing, slow, steady steps, back and forth, for what felt like a long time. I listened too. She was right. There was definitely someone pacing on the other side of the wall. Motels are thin-walled, not unusual. I told her to go back to sleep. What made it stick with me was that in the morning, walking out to the car, I glanced at the door to that room out of curiosity. And there was a maintenance notice taped to it, the kind hotels put up when a room's out of service, dated almost 2 weeks earlier. I mentioned it to my dad, mostly as a funny observation, and he actually went and asked the front desk about it, half out of curiosity himself. The clerk, a different one from check-in, told him that room had been closed since a plumbing issue 2 weeks back, and nobody had been in to fix it yet, so it should have been completely empty. We ran through the logical explanations in the car, actually talked it out as a family, half to reassure my sister. Sound carries strangely in old buildings. Maybe it wasn't that room at all. Maybe it was coming from further down, and we'd misjudged the direction in the dark. Maybe a maintenance guy had gone in overnight, and we just hadn't seen a truck. My dad even called the motel line later that day to ask directly if anyone had accessed the room overnight for repairs. They checked their log. Nobody had. The last thing that happened was small, but it's the part I remember most clearly. Checking out the final morning, walking past that same door one more time, I noticed the maintenance notice had been moved. Not removed, just shifted, hanging slightly crooked, like someone had opened the door from the inside and let it swing back against the paper. We never stayed at that motel again on later visits. Without ever really discussing why, we just always booked somewhere else. My sister still won't talk about that trip if it comes up. I don't know who or what was pacing in a room that had supposedly been empty for 2 weeks, and I've never gone back to that stretch of road to find out. The week after graduation, before I moved out for good, I had to go back to my old dorm to clear out a storage locker in the basement, one of those wire cage units assigned to residents for off-season stuff, bins, winter coats, things you don't need in your room day to day. Most of the building was already empty by then. Graduation had cleared everyone out days earlier, and the halls had that particular echo empty buildings get. I went down around 9 at night because I had a flight early the next morning, and it was my last real chance. The basement had always been a little rundown, exposed pipes, a single flickering light strip down the main hallway, but I'd been down plenty of times over 4 years without thinking twice about it. The first odd thing, and it really was small, was that my storage cage, which I distinctly remembered locking with my own combination lock back in September, was unlocked when I got there, lock still looped through the latch, just not clicked shut. I figured I must have not closed it all the way the last time I'd grabbed something, months earlier, and hadn't thought about it since. I started loading bins onto a cart, and for a while it was just tedious, ordinary work, dragging bins, checking labels, nothing unusual at all. Then I noticed the light strip down the hallway, the one that had flickered on and off unpredictably for 4 straight years without me ever caring, flicker exactly 3 times, evenly spaced, and then hold steady bright, the same pattern. I realized, with a small cold jolt, that a friend of mine who'd been an RA in a different building had once described to me, almost word for word, from a story she never fully finished telling. I told myself it was a coincidence. Old buildings have old wiring, and flickering patterns aren't exactly rare. I kept loading the cart. The temperature dropped next, localized to that one stretch of hallway near my cage, cold enough that I noticed it on my arms before I consciously registered why. I checked the vents overhead out of habit, nothing running, no airflow I could feel or hear, nothing that should have caused a cold spot at all. I went through it logically, same as I always had, same as everyone in every one of these stories probably has. Basements are naturally cooler. Old buildings have uneven insulation. Flickering lights are just bad ballasts. Each thing alone made sense. What didn't make sense was the smell. Right at the end, right as I was zipping the last bin shut, that same faint, metallic, struck match smell I hadn't thought about since freshman year, since a closet door in a room I hadn't lived in for 3 years, gone as fast as it came, like it had never been there at all. I didn't investigate. I loaded the last bin, wheeled the cart to the elevator, and didn't look back down that hallway before the doors closed. I left campus the next morning and never went back down to that basement, or really that building, again. I still don't know if what I felt that night had anything to do with what happened to my old roommate years earlier, or if it was something else entirely, something that had just always been down there, waiting for the building to finally empty out enough for someone to notice. That's 8 nights I still think about, more than I'd like to admit. If any of this kept you company tonight, or helped you drift off somewhere in the middle, that's really all I make these for. If you want more of these while you fall asleep or grind out survival runs, there's a subscribe button that does that for you, automatically. I hope wherever you're listening from tonight is quiet and stays that way. Get some rest.